Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
And then finally, other people, you know what, they've closed deals, they're doing great at prospecting, they're hitting their number. They're going to think that that's going to keep continuing. So, maybe I don't need to learn anything.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, and welcome to today's show. On today's show, we have Tim Clarke, the Director of Product Marketing over at salesforce.com, and I asked Tim the question, do all sales professionals need sales training? Clearly, we've launched the sales school recently, and so we believe that sales training is super important to sales professionals, and so I can probably guess the way that the conversation is going to go. You can find out more about Tim over at quotable.com. If you enjoy our podcast, you might enjoy Tim's sales show as well. Just search for the Quotable Podcast in iTunes or Stitcher or your favorite Android app, and you can download it there. And with that all said, let's jump into today's episode. Hey, Tim, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks. It's great to finally be on the show. I've seen so many different episodes. Love the Salesman Podcast and love what you're doing for the Sales Nation.
I appreciate that, Tim. I appreciate that you tune in as well. That means a lot. And yeah, today we're going to have a cool conversation about sales training, how that impacts your performance, how it impacts perhaps your commissions and everything that comes out the other end of it. And perhaps we can look at some best practices for the audience as well. Now, having said all that, we probably have quite a skewed audience listening to this because they are actively, first off, hunting out sales training and sales improvement content. They're downloading it and listening to it hopefully every day, and they're getting a lot from it. But I want to start you this loaded question here, mate. For the 10, 20,000 people that are going to download this and listen to it over the next couple of weeks, should every single one of them have focus and time in their diary each week for sales training of some sorts?
I mean, I think in terms of the question, should they? Absolutely yes. Will they? Maybe a small percentage of them. I think you need to cut it up into what the top performers are really doing and how much time they set aside for their development. The next tier down is then who's got a really good manager who is helping with the coaching of the team and getting them on to different training. And then finally, other people, you know what, they've closed deals, they're doing great at prospecting, they're hitting their number. They're going to think that that's going to keep continuing. So, maybe I don't need to learn anything. So I think they're the three different tiers.
And I like the way you phrase that. The people who think that it's going to keep continuing, because when I first jumped in sales, that's where I was. I had a lucky break at first, closed a big medical device deal, and that kind of pushed me along for 6 months where I didn't actually do much, which was good because obviously then I could learn the product, service, and everything else as well. But it got me, it made me lazy a little bit when I first joined the medical device world. Are the people who are listening to perhaps a show like this now, who are going, that's kind of resonating with them. They're thinking, I kind of hit target, I plod along, I do all right, but sales training is definitely lacking from my diary. Is this something that is possibly, an opportunity for them to take that step up into the league of the big boys, the big closers, the people who get into the President's Club? Is sales training, perhaps more so than anything else, the thing that's going to get them there?
And it's also defining what sales training is, right? So when I joined Salesforce and I was an enterprise account executive, I had 6 years of prior sales experience before that. The first thing I did when joining Salesforce was I wanted to learn the product knowledge. The second thing was then looking at actually how do you sell cloud-based services, subscription services. So it's then moving from what you sell to the way that you sell it. And then finally, you've also then got to look at the skills that you have as well. So, it's looking at maybe it's your PowerPoint skills. If you're doing a presentation, maybe it's whiteboarding. Maybe you're at an event or you're doing a dinner and how to host those and have that great gravitas as you walk into the room. So there's so many different types of skills. And I think a lot of the time, let's just talk about at an organizational level, they consider enablement just to be product enablement. And there isn't enough focus on the skills. And that's why some of the best sales reps that I've seen have really spent the time themselves, rightly or wrongly, just going out there and saying, hey, you know what, I need to develop this particular skill. And either they spend their own money or the company's money to go and develop. And that's what's going to make them stand out.
So we're definitely going to come back to this idea of the salesperson taking control and responsibility for their own, I guess the corporate phrase would be personal development or success development or something along those lines. But you said something interesting then, which I noticed and picked up on. Is this the order that we should be kind of focusing down on our on our sales training, going from product to how to sell to the individual sales skills themselves? Is that the best way to go about it?
I think it depends on where you're at in your career. So my previous company to Salesforce was Ricoh, so very well known for like copiers, devices, print rooms, mail rooms, a ton of software for document management. And I remember working. I was at the European level working with a guy in Ricoh, UK. Great sales guy. I learned so much from him because he'd been in this sales career for 20, 30 years. So for him, other than obviously refreshing on some of these skills and getting some feedback on how he's coming across in meetings, for him it was about keeping up to date with the latest product development, software developments, etc. Whereas for me, when I was starting out my sales career, I needed to juggle everything. Clearly, I needed to know the products, and that may just be my personal learning style. I feel a lot more when I know, all of the products that are available to me in the team. But then finally, it's also looking at team selling. Some of the other great salespeople that I've seen actually don't know that much, but they're very good at bringing in the right people around them, whether it's solution experts or overlay salespeople to sell as a team. And clearly for the audience on the podcast, it's going to depend on the size of organization that you are. But the biggest piece of advice I would give, and looking at my own career, you said it there, is your personal development plan. So I always ensured that on a monthly basis, I would sit down with my manager. I knew where I wanted to get to in my career, and we'd do a review of, how am I doing against my particular development goals, and then kind of red, amber, green against the certain skills that I do and don't have. And then that was a great assessment for me to say, hey, I need to go and do this course, or I really need to focus a little bit more in this area.
And let's focus on you for a second here, Tim, because you're doing crazy stuff with Salesforce, all the events, everything that you're putting on, all the quotable side of things, the podcast, the blog. You've got, obviously, what's the phrase? You wear many hats. What do you do right now? Clearly that you're beyond just sales, and you're doing brand, you're doing marketing, you're doing thought leadership, all kinds of cool stuff. What do you do right now to improve upon yourself and to enhance and what is your personal development plan right this second?
Firstly, just to kind of define the role a little bit more. One of the things we see here daily at Salesforce is we have over 150,000 customers, and many companies start their journey with Salesforce selling and using the technology for sales. But as we're discussing here, the most successful salespeople aren't just the ones with great technology. They're the ones that really focus on their own development and have some great processes. And that's for me and my team, that's our role. We are purely focused on helping sales professionals with great insights and to develop themselves. So for me now, actually, I've made an interesting transition in the last few months, because I've gone from being an individual contributor in a marketing role as opposed to sales role, and now I'm running a team of 4 individuals. So for me, I'm now actually really focused on their success, making sure that they've got development plans, because if they're successful and if some of the work that they're doing really comes across well, then that's going to make me look good as well. And then one of the other key things is, if you think about some of the really, I think, really cool stuff that we've done in the last 18 months, it's now saying, how do we do version 2 of that, version 3 of that, to really reach the sales audience out there.
So let me rephrase that and ask you like an open-ended and a slightly different question here. Out of all the options, so there's clearly podcasts that work well because you can listen to it whilst you're doing your driving or your commute or going to your next sales meeting. You can get that bit of motivation and that spark. There's, of course, books, which some people do like reading, some people don't like reading. I have to force myself to read books, but I get a lot of value from them. So I'm happy to force myself to do that. There's in-person events. There's all these kinds of different platforms to learn to improve yourself, both in sales and life and self-help and everything else that goes along with it. What works for you? What platform do you get? What platform goes into your head and sticks in there and really makes an impact out of all of them that are available?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we're on exactly the same page with reading. So I have, since I moved from London to San Francisco, I've still got 25 boxes of books which are sitting in my spare room, which are probably not going to make it outside of the box. because it's just not my learning style. I mean, if I really need to, I will probably try and find a Cliff Notes version of the book just to digest. For me, I'm a very visual person, so I would be quite happy watching different videos on YouTube, downloading stuff if I'm going to be offline, on a plane, etc. Classroom learning is also great. There's a ton of events out there. The market is completely saturated. So number one is clearly finding what are the 1 or 2 events that you will attend throughout the year. We're in sales, right? We're busy. We constantly have to generate more pipe. We have to close these deals. So you can't be like me in marketing, where I'm constantly going to a different event every single week. You really need to be focused on what are those events. And it's not just about what you're going to learn and who you're going to learn from, but it's about who else is going to be there. Who can you network with? Because those people at those conferences could be your next buyer, could be perhaps your next prospective employer as well. So I think there's a massive opportunity still there with events. And then finally, podcasts. Clearly on the Salesman Podcast, there's a ton of podcasts out there. I think it's really important, again, to find a solid podcast that has the sort of individuals that you want sharing their insights. There's also a lot of them that are quite product focused, which everyone gets turned off by product. How many times do you go through and buy my product, and you just unfollow? And so I think it's finding the people and podcasts that are very true to their strategy and true to their brand, because then you're their trusted advisor.
Definitely. And this leads us on to, especially with the in-person event side of things, the cost and the money associated with all this. So I'm a firm believer that 9 times out of 10, especially with books as well, like books are so cheap for the value that you can get from them. Even if it's not the most up to date, the core concepts of sales and communication and dealing with people and adding value don't change. So there's plenty of great books on that subject. But when you then scale up into things like in-person events, this is a mixed question. I've asked this on the podcast before, and it's been perhaps 50-50, maybe 70-30 as to the response. But should sales professionals, the thousands of people listening to the show right now, should they be investing into themselves, putting themselves through all these conferences, taking as much away from it as they possibly can? Or should they be only going to these things if the sales manager approves it and they can sign it off with expenses?
I think it comes back to the motivation, right? How bad do you want to be that top salesperson? So if I was still in sales and, we ran an amazing event in New York earlier this year in June with sales hacker Max Alschiller, who I know you've had on the show, called Sales Machine. And we had so many people there that actually came off their own buck. They didn't want to miss out. They wanted to develop. They wanted to network. And let's think about those individuals. If they'd gone to their manager and let's just say they didn't have a good job, or we as event organizers didn't help them have a clear ROI. If that manager goes, no, sorry, you can't do it. Well, then you've got that decision point. As that sales rep, do you, obviously without losing your job, do you say, hey, if I pay for it myself, can I go? And if the answer is yes, then great. But if you're just going to accept that answer, then maybe you're just going to tick along in your role, and then maybe you're going to fall behind the game. Someone else is going to be going to that conference, and that person you might come up against in a sale, and they're probably going to win it.
And that's what I wanted to ask and wrap up this part of the show with, Tim, because what happens when we stop developing? What happens when we get comfortable? What happens when we just decide, I've hit target for the past 2 years, I can just plod along now? And I've got loads of thoughts on this that I can share, but from your perspective, what happens when you just get comfortable is probably the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, so when I started my sales career, it was 2007, cable and wireless, now Vodafone in good old Bracknell, Berkshire. Facebook had just come out at that time, or a few years before, and I was one of those kids at university when you had to have a university email address. And so when I joined the sales team, I'm like, well, are you on LinkedIn? Are you on Facebook? Are you using these different technologies to connect? We're now in 2016 and we're still trying to help get over the concept of social selling. I think finally people have accepted that it's not something completely separate. It's just another level. It's not just tweeting, LinkedIn versus cold calling. I personally feel like you need a little bit of everything depending on where your buyer is and how to connect with them. But as we've seen just in this particular example, the people that are evolving and are learning about these different social networks, they're the ones that are connecting. They're the ones that are reaching, the good ones anyway. We've both probably seen some really bad prospecting examples. But they're the ones that have clearly read online or listened to podcasts or gone to events, and they recognize that, hey, in order for them to move forwards in their career, they've got to adapt. It's interesting, and I don't want to generalize and say it's like a demographic thing, but people that have got more tenured sales careers, they're actually the people that I think companies should be spending even more time with to help them grasp some of these concepts on how you can actually leverage these different technologies to connect. So to loop back to your question, I think it's so important to evolve and to learn and to listen. And you do have to dedicate the time to do that. And it is hard. It is really, really hard. But if you want to be successful and get the commission check at the end of it, then you got to dedicate the time.
And final thing on this, before I run through a couple of questions, I ask everyone that comes on the show, Tim. Let's get real practical about this for a second. And maybe neither of us don't have the data to kind of delve down, and it might be a gut feeling that we can both share. But how much time per week, or even per day perhaps, should we be spending working on ourselves and improving our both sales skills, but also like business acumen and all the other stuff that comes along with it? If you had to give me a finite figure, what would be that number perhaps per week?
I mean, there's tons of productivity tips and, recommendations such as book out an hour a day and schedule it in your calendar and use that time. But we know what the world of sales is like. If I'm selling to you and I've got 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. scheduled to do personal development, and then you send me an email saying, hey, Tim, I really need to discuss that contract. Can I have a call at 1? You're going to win every single time. For me personally, when I was an A and even in the marketing role right now, there are a couple of sites that I read every day on my commute back then into London and now in San Francisco. That's when I would do the time. So rather than sitting on the train or standing on the lovely train from Reading to London, I was using that time then to read different articles to stay current. And I think also one of the other points we haven't touched on too much, it isn't just about using podcasts and events and content just to develop yourself. It's actually to position yourself with your potential buyers. So what I mean by that is, if you're not out there on these different networks sharing the right type of content, let's say you're selling into the financial services industry, your job as a salesperson should be looking at what sites are really putting out the relevant content, trends impacting that vertical, that sector, and then sharing that on your networks, because if you're connecting with these potential buyers, they're going to see you as that, I don't like the term, but trusted advisor. So
why don't you like that term?
I think it's the same as thought leader. It's just,
cheesy.
Right. It's just thrown all over the place. I mean, the word trust is the critical piece, right? And certainly at Salesforce, it's the number one thing with trust right at the center. But if you think about who do you want to buy from? You want someone that knows your business. You are confident that they know your business. You want someone that you trust, that is not lying to you, and they're not just trying to get the deal over the line for month end. And you want someone that can work with you again, because the major shift that we've seen in selling, depending again on your organization and how you're structured, is it isn't really the hunting farming model anymore. It's less so where someone goes in, they close the deal, then they move along. There's so much upsell potential, and many companies now, particularly in the SaaS industry, are completely subscription based. So if you don't have your happy customer, then you're going to lose them. So that's where it comes back to being that trusted person, because as that sales rep, you need to have that ongoing relationship. So I wanted to flag that, because when we're talking about developing yourselves, it actually you can hit 2 birds with 1 stone. There we go. Nice. Because particularly if you're selling into the sales industry, for example, you could read something on quotable.com, which would help develop you, and also something that you can then share with your prospective buyer.
I appreciate that, Tim. I mean, from my perspective, with all of this, trust is at the kind of the center. Clearly, I'm doing a podcast for salespeople. I'm in front of salespeople constantly every day. Thousands of people are listening to the show. And so trust is at the center of everything that we're doing with the products that we're developing on both a subscription and a one-off fee, which you guys will have known all about the Sales School because we mentioned it and it's launching soon. But the other subscription side of things that we're working on as well, it's so based on trust. And until I become clearly the sales professional that's also an entrepreneur as well, or the entrepreneur that's a sales professional at heart, that's at the center of all of this, I didn't realize how important trust was. Which is crazy looking back at the medical device world, which is where I came from, where, the surgeon, even though you're selling them a product and a service and you're looking after them and supporting them, they trust you, and this may be an extreme example, but they trust you that the product you just sold them, the training that you've given them, is not going to screw up and kill the person that they're working on, especially with the endoscopes and the technology that I was selling at the time. And it's only in hindsight that you realize how much stock a surgeon puts in you from a trust perspective, and that's because they're not particularly price sensitive. It's not their money that they're spending, especially in the UK over here. It's the NHS's money that they're spending primarily, other than the small private practices. So they're happy to price goes off the table, not the conversation, when you've got that trust there, and it's that's been a learning experience for me of just really how important that is. And you mentioned the SaaS world. If you don't trust the person, you use it for a month and you cancel, and all that work has been undone at that point, hasn't it?
And so let me throw it back at you. With all the people that are listening to your podcast, if you start to change the content within your podcast, so you've got people coming on that are doing pure product plugs, and it's just about them. Then all of a sudden, then you've lost your trust, you've lost your credibility. But the reason that so many people keep coming back and listening to the show is because they trust you, is because they know the type of content, the type of individual that is going to come onto the show. And so trust is clearly critical.
And the main thing for all this, Tim, is that the audience know me as a sales professional. I don't claim to be a guru, a thought leader, as you described before, or anything like that. I think a lot of that is nonsense. They know that because I've had people come on the show, they've written a book, they wrote a book 10 years ago. It was super successful, and they're still touring the speaking circuit, talking about the principles in that book. And they're earning way more money than what I'm earning for the speaking gigs that they're doing.
But they can never handle the Q&A at the end, though. That's always the litmus test.
Well, they can never handle the conversation that I have. And as soon as I ask them about something, and I hate the word social selling, but as soon as I ask them something along those lines or get that step deeper than the couple of articles that they've read on it, it turns into a weird conversation, and most of the time it doesn't air on the show unless I want to make an example of someone, which happened once and probably won't happen again for the foreseeable future. But yeah, trust is so wrapped up in all of this, and I think from a training perspective, any training we can do to improve our levels of trust and to understand it better are clearly at the top of my list with these kind of things. And with that, Tim, I've got a couple of questions to ask everyone that comes on the show, mate. First one, talking about sales training and resources and books for this, what's one book or resource that you'd recommend to the Salesman Podcast audience?
The book that I've been reading recently was Mark Hunter's brand new book, High Profit Prospecting. I love Mark. I've worked with him on a ton of our different events. The reason I find it really interesting, it goes back to one of your earlier questions in the show when we were talking about social selling and the different layers. The prospecting, there are so many examples of really good and really bad prospecting. I get so many people trying to sell into me constantly, and it's horrific. You get an email, and then the second email, oh, I didn't hear from you. Well, I know you did because there's so much technology out there that will tell you that I opened your email. And the third one, I still didn't hear from you. Could you at least respond to me? And it's horrific. So I actually think right now, that is the area where a lot of salespeople can really stand out and to differentiate. So I really enjoyed reading Mark's book.
Good stuff. We had Mark on the show recently to talk about his book, and I recommend it as well. I think we need to do a giveaway of it as well. There's enough people talking about it.
Right.
Mentally, I'll put that on the back burner for the next couple of giveaways we've got coming up. Next one, Tim, who is the world's greatest salesperson?
You know what? I'm going to say Kevin Jarrett, and no one will know who this guy is. He was the guy I referred to earlier on in the UK, working for Rico, and I learned so much from the guy. He could go into a room and he would light the room up with his personality, his warmth. He was able to handle any single conversation. So for me, the the world's best salesperson is the person that I learned from, the person that helped me with my sales career. On the back of that, I closed a really, really big deal. And so I'm always grateful to that individual.
Definitely. And I love it, Tim, when people talk about individuals that, for want of a better word, mentored them as well, as opposed to every time someone mentions Steve Jobs, I'm sick in my mouth a little bit because it's so cliche. So I appreciate that. And, nice to stroke his ego a little bit, and we'll show him the show, I'm sure.
I'm still trying to get him to use LinkedIn. So he's one of these individuals that maybe needs to modernize a little bit. Yeah. But look him up.
I'll send him a tape of the recording of it on VHS or something.
Yeah.
Next one, mate. Dollar size if possible. What's the biggest deal you've ever closed? Or pound sterling?
$134 million, 5-year contract. I was 24 at the time. The downside of that was I was not in a commission-based role. I was in a capped bonus role. But the biggest things I took away from that, I was with a big pharmaceutical company, headquartered in the UK, but massive presence in Raleigh, North Carolina, and all over the world, 85 countries. They needed someone. It was an 18-month deal cycle. They needed someone that was trusted, and so I went to about 15 of these different countries and met with their key stakeholders. So I got so much experience from an international perspective. And just working on something on that size, creating 9 jobs out of it, being able to hire people to help them with their careers over 5 years was great. So long deal cycle, big deal, but really helped my career and took me on to my next role, which was getting a job in Salesforce.
Awesome. I love it, these stories, and it's always interesting there's always seems to be, doesn't matter whether it's 30 grand, 300 grand, or in the millions, there's that one deal always stands out in people's minds. I always love hearing those the tales about them. And with that, Tim, I've got one final question for you, mate. So I'm going to ask everyone that comes on the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at sales?
I think just the importance of relationships. I think very early on, I'm a very, very independent person, and just tried to do everything myself, and would put in all the hours around the clock in order to achieve that. But I rapidly learned that actually when you sell as a team and you bring in people with other expertise and you realize that they're there with the same goal, and when I say team, I'm including the customer or the potential customer in that team as well. That's where you get the most success.
And we've talked about this on the show before. I, in the past, had a huge problem with just asking for help from other people. And I still don't do it enough now in what we do with the show, even though I constantly add value and hopefully, both to the audience and to the people who come on the show, we promote the heck out of them. I'm still a bit kind of like, whenever I have to ask them for a favor. So it's something to work on. And so I appreciate that, Tim. And with that, mate, I want you to tell us a little bit about the Quotable Podcast, where we can find that, and then also the Quotable blog as well, because, talking about learning more from a training perspective and reading those articles and listening to those shows, you've got some awesome content from a whole bunch of, although we both hate the word, thought leaders on the blog as well. And there's just so much to go at with it that I think it's really valuable that you share it with our audience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things I've been very passionate about at Salesforce, we have an amazing blog, and it addresses the needs of sales, service, marketing, IT. But a lot of the content is best practices, it's product knowledge and release knowledge, and that's absolutely valuable and extremely important. But one of the areas where I felt there was a big gap was, what are we doing for salespeople? What are we doing for 150,000 customers? We started the podcast recently as well, quotable.com/. And just bringing people onto the show and getting their insights, and we've had some great people from McKinsey, CEB, as well as the thought leaders and then practitioners. But as we said right at the beginning, I don't think there's one person or one company that's ever going to own the sales conversation. I think it's really important for people to listen to the Salesman Podcast, the Quotable Podcast. You need to get insights from different areas, different perspectives, and that's what's going to make you a really rounded sales individual.
Definitely. I agree with that, even though clearly my emphasis is to get everyone to download at least one show a day and to listen to it. But look, you've got to commute to and from work. It's as simple as that. And then as soon as you stop faffing around at lunch and just chatting crap with people that, you probably care about half of them and not that fussed about the other half, that's people you speak to internally, there's an opportunity at lunchtime to, sit and read or listen to a show, or if nothing else, speak to your the people around you, especially if you're inside sales or if you've got the opportunity to hang out with other sales professionals in the team face to face, ask them questions and get mentoring off them. I think that's a really underutilized resource. And look, I'd be more than happy I'm excited for the audience to, listen to an episode of the Salesman Podcast on the way to work, and then listen to something perhaps quotable or an industry specific show, so you can improve your business acumen just as a whole on the way home. I think that's super valuable.
And you mentioned the commute there, or even if you're an Arsenal fan and you're on the way to watch them beating Liverpool, that's a great opportunity to listen to a podcast there as well.
It's definitely, and if you're Liverpool on the way home from that, you probably just want to sit and be miserable and hands in heads in tears. I think Liverpool did all right this year. We're not going to dive into this because there's another 15-minute conversation to have here, Tim, on the superiority of Liverpool, both historically and the prestige of the team versus any other team in the Premiership. And with that, mate, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your insights. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
And there we have it, Tim. Thank you for joining on the show, mate. I really appreciate your time, your insights on this topic. Really do. I want to thank you guys, Sales Nation, as always, for tuning in. It means a lot that you are constantly sharing the show and helping us grow. Clearly, the faster we grow, bigger guests we can bring on, the more resources I can throw at you guys to help you thrive in sales. And with that all said, I'll speak with you again on tomorrow's episode.